How does poor sleep really affect our work performance and decision-making abilities?
I mean, if you think about all the functions of the brain, they get affected by in a detrimental way with poor sleep. You know, I think that one of the things that preferentially gets impaired, one part of the brain that preferentially gets impaired when you get less sleep, is your prefrontal cortex, which is the brain that's just behind your forehead. So when people don't get enough sleep, they're making decisions in which their emotional brain is overactive, while the good judgment part of their brain is actually asleep, right? And actually, there's been a lot of research which shows that if you don't get enough sleep, there's increase in internet. People show up to work, but they're not really present.
Imagine if your productivity, financial decisions, and even your overall health could be shaped by or overlooked factor, your sleep. Today, Dr. Meeta Singh, renowned sleep specialist, shares how understanding the science of sleep can transform how you perform and make money-driven decisions every day. Don't miss this. Keep listening all the way to the end. I'm Chris Hensley. Our show today is Money Matter. And Dr. Singh, thank you so much for joining us today.
Chris, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Can you share a little bit about yourself so that listeners can get to know you?
Mhm. So I'm a board certified sleep medicine specialist as well as a psychiatrist. I did my medical training at Mayo Clinic, did a fellowship in sleep medicine at the Henry Ford Sleep Disorder Center. I have a large private practice, and the practice it's somewhat unique. I work with professional athletes, C-suite executives. Actually, work a lot in the financial world, and essentially with the focus of optimizing sleep so that enhances and optimizes performance as well as overall health and well-being.
I love it. Now, you reached out to me and we thought about this show, I look back and over the 10 years of doing this show, I'm like, we didn't do an episode on sleep yet. This is such a great topic. It sounds like you're working with peak performers, athletes. Doing the research on the show, I saw that you had been on a podcast for Whoop, the Whoop wearable band. They have their own podcast. So, great topic. But let's back up a little bit and kind of think of it from the layperson, somebody who's just getting their feet wet on sleep and kind of understanding what it's about. Can you explain why sleep is so essential for mental and physical health and what happens to our bodies during sleep that we often just take for granted?
That is a very good question. So think about sleep as a biological need, right? You spend a third of your life sleeping, one third. And so if sleep did not serve an absolutely vital function, it would be a colossal wastage of time. Now, sleep is a biological need, and it's a time where your brain is disengaged from the environment and it's unresponsive to the environment. And because your body is inactive, it forces you to rest. So, rest and recovery happen while you're sleeping. And so I think a good way for your audience to understand it is to think about different body parts. So all the functions that you need for your brain, they are sleep enhances them. So anything you learn, so memory consolidation happens during the sleep. Emotional intelligence, which is the ability to relate with other people, that is a function of a well-rested brain. Creativity or problem solving is what happens during your sleep. But then in addition to that, not just in your brain, but every part of your body, the functioning of your, rest and recovery in different physiological systems in your body happen while you're sleeping. So, people ask, why do people sleep? Well, people sleep so you can show up and are alert and productive the next day. That's the reason we sleep.
I love it. I love it. And I think of rest and recovery. Some of the people that you work with, the financial people, the athletes, those are some of the hardest to kind of get by the shoulder and say, "Hey, sit there. You
Yes.
need some recovery," right? So having this kind of working just in the background while you're asleep, the things that you mentioned, creativity, memory, huge things, that we need to have a recovery period in there to re-up our game. Right? So let's talk about, because of that you've worked with a lot of these athletes before. Let's talk a little bit about that. You've worked with elite athletes to improve their performance, and sleep optimization. What unique strategies do you use to help athletes sleep better, and how can everyday people apply similar tactics?
Well, so think about, elite athletes, from the time they wake up to the time they go to sleep, they have a coach, they're trying to optimize everything. So it absolutely makes sense that they should do that for the time when they're asleep, right? And so I think that um, for athletes, monitoring their sleep, figuring out what their patterns are, trying to fit sleep in um, during their regular season, which can be really, really busy because of all the demands that they have on them, becomes really, really essential. Plus, Chris, everything that happens during the day affects how you sleep at night. And how you sleep at night affects how you show up the next day. And so, managing the stress and anxiety, which may result in poor sleep, also becomes absolutely essential. And that's really is almost all of us, right? So it what happens is that for most people, they're on the go, go, go the entire day. And then when they get into bed, that's the first time they allow themselves to think. And sometimes they have racing thoughts, etc., that prevent them from sleeping at night. So, so managing your stress during the day so that it doesn't overwhelm you at night becomes really, really important.
I love it. I think about, I'm not a huge athlete, but I've done jujitsu. I competed for several years. And one of the best sleeps you get is after a training. Sometimes your body just tells you like, "Hey, you're taking a nap." That's what's happening, right? You mentioned, people not being able to sleep, to have that kind of worry or what about that doom scrolling? People that just get up in the middle of the night and then get on their electronics. How does that affect us?
Well, it affects you, people, in a detrimental way in two ways, right? So the first thing is that when the people who design phones and the apps, they know exactly what they're doing. They have behavioral scientists who are helping them, and they're very, very addicting. So y- I always tell people it's very similar to going to a buffet table. You never walk away from a buffet table thinking you ate less, right? And similarly, if you're scrolling or going on social media, typically people lose track of time, and that eats away from the time that they should be sleeping. So that's number one. Number two is, what are they doing on it, right? So if they're looking at something that can be anxiety provoking, that draws your attention, that itself can make it more difficult to fall back asleep. And of course, not just the interactive nature of what they're doing on the phone, but also the exposure to bright light, right? So if you're looking into a screen and you're shining light into your eyes, that makes it more difficult for people to relax and go to sleep. So typically at night, there's certain things they're called sleep hygiene, which is basically what you can do in the environment to make sure that uh, your nighttime sleep is protected. And that typically is, you want to keep your bedroom cold, you want to keep it dark. You don't want to be doing things at bedtime that can be stress provoking. So you don't want to be working in bed, or you don't want to be doom scrolling, etc., because that will prevent you from either initiating or maintaining sleep.
All very good tips there. I think of the physical part of just your body needing the rest, but then what we just talked about was the mental part,
Yes.
the addictiveness of these apps on our phones, right? Is somebody getting up in the middle of the night and say, "Well, I'll just get on the phone for a second," and nah, that doesn't happen. Yeah, you're on there for a while and you're introducing these thoughts into your head. So if you do have the stress and anxiety, it kind of gives you that circular worry thinking there. So all very, very good points. You also mentioned the idea of low light, the idea that it's better, it's more conducive to good sleep hygiene to have low light and not turning these electronics on in the middle of the night. So really good points for us to remember. Along the same lines, I wanted to talk about diet and exercise more on the physical part of it, right? How did diet and exercise impact our sleep quality? Are there specific foods or types of workouts that help or hinder a good night's rest?
Well, so that's a very good question, right? So, like I said, everything you do during the day predicts how well you're going to sleep at night. And an integral part of that is diet and exercise. So, any sort of exercise, both cardiovascular as well as strength training, help in sleeping at night. But if you overtire yourself, so if there's something called overtraining syndrome, especially in athletes, when they do too much, then that sometimes prevents them from sleeping at night. Sometimes the timing of the exercise also matters, right? So in some people who have poor sleep, if you do a strenuous workout really close to your bedtime, well, that may prevent you from sleeping at night. And so you want to be a little careful about that too. So that's what I would say about exercise. And also remember, so exercise is also, kind of helps anchor your rhythms. So you want to exercise. For me, I'm a morning person. Exercising in the morning is a good thing for me. If I exercise too close to my bedtime, it may prevent me from going to sleep. For other people who are nighttime, who have a tendency to be night owls, maybe exercising later in the evening is good for them. The same thing applies to diet. There are some really simple rules to follow. If you eat a large meal or spicy meals too close to your bedtime, well, that's going to prevent you from getting good restful sleep. It's going to impair the quality of your sleep. Plus, you're sending the wrong signal to your brain because you've just eaten a large meal and your body is preparing to shut down, and now it has to, gear up to digest that meal. So you want to exercise, you want to eat, you want to keep some time before you actually fall asleep. Like that's how you want to schedule your meals in a and bring some external schedule to it. I'll also say one thing, for typically at night, carbohydrate rich diet kind of helps you sleep at night. And for some people, when they're, especially for athletes, if, they might get really hungry if the time between the time they go to bed and the time that they've eaten that last meal is too long. So eating a smaller snack, maybe some yogurt or, nuts, that might be, or a banana or a couple of bananas is actually a good idea.
I love it. I love it. A lot of really good information there. I think about the guys who wait to compete there and then they go to bed hungry.
Yes.
And then that doesn't work for them, right? There's a way like, boy, I wish I could eat something. You also mentioned the idea of I'm kind of the same, a morning person. So working out in the morning is good for me. But if I work out in the afternoon or the evening, my heart rate gets up. It's harder for me to go to sleep then. But everybody's different, is what you were saying there. Just having some guardrails on that and knowing that that's a thing. We talked about that sometimes having a carb heavy meal at night does help. It makes you a little bit sleepier there. Let's talk about productivity. Many people sacrifice sleep to be more productive. How does poor sleep really affect our work performance and decision-making abilities?
Well, that's again a very good question. I mean, if you think about all the functions of the brain, they get affected by in a detrimental way with poor sleep. You know, I think that one of the things that preferentially gets impaired, one part of the brain that preferentially gets impaired when you get less sleep is your prefrontal cortex, which is the brain that's just behind your forehead. And that part of the brain is responsible for good decision making, for multitasking, for your judgment. And that gets preferentially impaired. And in addition, there's actually one part of the brain that lights up when you get less sleep, which is your emotional brain. So when people don't get enough sleep, they're making decisions in which their emotional brain is overactive, while the good judgment part of their brain is actually asleep. And so that impairs the way that they show up. Right. And actually, there's been a lot of research which shows that if you don't get enough sleep, there's increase in internet. People show up to work, but they're not really present, and so there's internet loafing, which is like they're on social media, etc. They're wasting their time, and
Yeah.
there's also research that shows that the interactions that you have with your coworkers, or the interaction that you have either with your subordinates or your boss, that becomes impaired because your judgment is slightly off. So people should really think about showing up well rested. Um, there's one more thing I want to touch upon. I think when people get less sleep on a chronic basis, what happens is, because their judgment is impaired, their ability to tell that they're impaired is also impaired. Does that make sense? So they're not.
Yeah.
It's like when you're drinking alcohol, you should be the last person who decides whether you are fit to drive. And so
That
sleep,
makes sense.
less sleep is similar to that. And so because the people can't tell whether they're impaired, I think that makes it even worse, because people don't have that ability to say that, well, I'm not at my level best today. And so that's why, on a consistent basis, trying to get good sleep becomes a very important thing.
I think I read a book many years ago that if you're in your work environment and a coworker comes up to you, if you've had lack of sleep, sometimes you perceive that as a threat when it's not a threat, but just because
Right.
you didn't have enough sleep. And then interesting, now that we're in a remote world, right? You brought up the idea of internet loafing, which I had not heard that term before, but I like, because it is a way of like, hey, are people working with it? So kind of gauging that. And I can see where sleep would also make it difficult for them to focus on the task at hand. So super important stuff. Now we all can wake up and whether they say get up on the wrong side of the bed, right? We can have a day where we've had poor sleep or poor sleep hygiene, but there are some people who have it chronically, right? Where this happens repeatedly over and over and over. I think those are called sleep disorders. What are some of the most common sleep disorders that you see in your practice, and what treatments or therapies are most effective for them?
Of course. So, yeah, I mean, sleep disorders are often largely undiagnosed. So the two main sleep disorders are sleep apnea, which is when people stop breathing at night. This can happen many times an hour, and 85 to 90% of people are not aware that they have sleep apnea. These are people who might be snoring, who make strange noises. And then insomnia is a disorder in which people have difficulty initiating and maintaining sleep, or non-restorative sleep. And they have this, for it lasts longer than a month or so. I have to tell you that for many people, sleep disorders are largely undiagnosed because, well, firstly, you're asleep, right? So you don't really know what's happening. And then
Right.
to that, there's sleep amnesia, which is like something that happens at night and you've not been long enough. You've not been awake long enough. So people don't remember that there's something strange is going on at night. So people don't seek help for it. I'll tell you, in my practice, we have this thing, and of course, there's one last thing that typically many primary care physicians may not ask about people's sleep. Now, in my practice, we have this bespoke sleep profiling, which is a book-ended 3-week program in which we have people come in. They meet with somebody on our staff. They fill out some sleep assessments which give us a really good comprehensive psychological and neurological profile about their sleep. And then we do sleep studies which are consecutive, so we do it for at least a minimum of 10 to 14 days in a row at people's homes. So these are FDA approved sleep studies to figure out what's happening with their sleep. And then we put all this information together, and it's it's like a vital sign. You go every year to your doctor to get your labs drawn to figure out if you're on the right path. So since my practice is a concierge sleep medicine practice, it's a proactive preventive uh, practice in which the kind of in addition to athletes and C-suite executives, I'm people who come to my practice are people, if their physician sends them to us, that they may or may not have a sleep disorder, or when people say, hey, I think I may have a sleep disorder, or just people who are healthy and they want to stay healthy. So they're like, we've got everything else of when it comes to our health figured out, but we want to find out whether I'm getting healthy sleep. And we do this on an annual basis to make sure that they are healthy and they stay healthy.
I love that. So that's a pretty big range there for anybody who's already got these chronic issues where the sleep apnea was one that you mentioned. I laughed a little bit because you mentioned that you're asleep and you don't know it. My wife told me one time, or if several times I've done this where I've talked into my sleep.
Mhm.
Just I might have been dreaming or something and said something. He said it's the creepiest thing. It'll be in the middle of the night and I'm like laughing or something, saying something, and then I have no recollection of
Yes.
yeah, I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, but I imagine sleep apnea in some ways you're asleep, you don't know. So the idea that you guys are doing this diagnostic where it's taking weeks of data to really see what's going on while you're sleeping, that sounds huge. And then you also mentioned that people that are, considered not chronic or sleep disorders, but they're healthy and they want to maintain that way. That's
Yes.
always good to get in front of something and what are the best practices and that sort of thing. So huge, very huge there. Well, let's talk about the future of sleep science. What new research or advancements in sleep science are you excited about? And how might that change the way we approach sleep in the next decade or so?
Oh, I this is my favorite topic because we with science and the new tools we have out there, like that this is progressing at a very rapid at a really rapid rate. Traditionally, if you wanted to get your sleep evaluated, you'd probably go to your primary care, a physician or a provider, and then they would refer you based on, like, for example, let's take Chris's example, right? Your wife would say, look, this is becoming a problem. You need to go get evaluated, and then you'd be evaluated, right? Now we don't need to do, we've we have telemedicine. You can, yeah, I'm, for example, I have licenses in 11 states. So I see patients in different states. You can do it via telemedicine. You can do the actual FDA approved sleep study at the patient's home. They don't need to travel and go to a sleep lab. And you get consecutive, get longitudinal data in which you can look at sleep over a few days or over a few nights. For example, for athletes, you can get to see them how they're sleeping at home. If they're in their home team and they're sleeping at home, and when they travel, when they go to a new time zone, how they're sleeping there. And it gives you a really good information. So now, the assessment and the diagnosis becomes really individualized. It gives us, we're not just looking at like one night in a sleep lab, but we can give information of what happens in your sleep environment. And so the solutions also become really optimized and individualized. That's what I that's what's most exciting about sleep now, medicine in today's world.
I love it. I love it. Very optimistic idea of what the bringing technology in and the idea of not even, you know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you had to go to these clinics and stay there. And now you can do this from the comfort of your own home, but still have a physician,
Yeah.
an expert there with you to guide you along the way. So I love that. I also wanted to ask you another question here. And this one has to do with things like jet lag, or I work with state employees. Some of those are overnight employees, shift workers, right? So they have these strange schedules. I also think about firemen, right? That they're doing these 48-hour stints where they're up for many hours. How does that work in relation to our body's natural sleep rhythm?
Well, and I, before I answer and give you some background about those rhythms and jet lag, these are essential services, right? Like the fireman who's out there and is on call for 24 to 48 hours is doing really, really essential work. And we want them to be well rested, right? So, so just for your audience, just to explain to them, we, all of us, we have this clock, timekeeping system, which we have in our brain, right? It's called your circadian clock, and it keeps time over 24 hours. And it's also, regularly set to exposure to light and darkness. So, um, now, if you're up too late and you're not maintaining that, if you're working non-traditional hours, you can have you're a shift worker, and not all shift workers have a sleep disorders, but some do, and so they may have difficulty sleeping when they're supposed to. They may have difficulty being alert when they're supposed to be at work, and then of course there's also people who have to take a plane and go to a different time zone to work. And when you do that, you get on a jet to do that, your circadian rhythms, they lag behind and they can cause all these symptoms. Again, in difficulty sleeping at the new time zone, difficulty being alert when at your new time zone at the local times. And and again, typically this is always addressed in a individualized fashion, in which you look at somebody's circadian rhythms, you look at their travel schedule or their work schedule, and then you guide them or help them, sleep and in a scheduled time, and be alert at a scheduled time. Sometimes, simple things like making strategically protecting your nighttime sleep. I'll tell you, if like for somebody who's a night shift worker, you and I would think twice before calling somebody in the middle of the night, right? At like say 3 in the morning. But we do that randomly during the day. So like things like making sure your phone is turned off if you're trying to sleep during the day, making sure your bedroom is cold and dark, and making sure that you protect your sleep if it's happening during the day, so that you can be fresh at night. Those are some of the strategies that one can use.
That makes a lot of sense. Hitting that do not disturb on the phone, keeping the lights low, hopefully maybe getting some heavy curtains if they're mowing the grass outside or
Yes.
something. But super important for people that work those hours, that want to have a productive family life and they don't want to doze off in the middle of dinner. Super important, these tips that you're giving us, this information here. I love it. I love it. Well, we've got just a few minutes before we're bumping towards the end of the show. Dr. Singh, what have I forgot to ask you that you'd like to share with listeners today?
I think that if I was to talk about, like, quick tips about how you can make sure you get enough sleep, I think one of the things I would talk about is winding down. So it's really, really important to build an individualized wind down schedule just before you're going to bed. So, if for many people, they're working really hard and then they turn the computer off and then they're commanding themselves to fall asleep. That's not how sleep happens. You really need to, set aside about 30 to 45 minutes in which you do something quiet and relaxing, brushing your teeth, maybe taking a hot bath or a shower. If people have spiritual, lives, that's the good time to do it. Do something, relaxing, some stretching, exercises, maybe reading, even if it includes like watching TV, something relaxing with a timer. Those are things that you can do to help you fall asleep. The other tip I would give to people is that your brain really likes consistency. So trying to go to bed and wake up at the same time with not much of an hour, maybe an hour difference between work days and weekends is really important, because many times people, they go to bed during the weekday and they have to wake up at a certain time, but then on the weekend they go to bed 3 or 4 hours later and then sleep until noon, and then they do
Right.
this cycle repeatedly. That is not something that's not healthy for your sleep. Then again, we talked about it should be dark outside. You want it to be, you want it to be dark in your bedroom at night, but then during the day, you want to be exposed to nice bright light because that helps set your and strengthen your circadian rhythms. And then, of course, you want to make sure that you don't drink too much caffeine or even alcohol too close to your bedtime, because they can both disrupt your sleep at night.
I love that. Great information there. Great information. Dr. Singh, thank you so much for being on the show today. For listeners who would like to find out more about you, what is the best place for them to find information about you?
Well, I do have a website. It's called meetasinghmd.com. We have a weekly newsletter that goes out to, it's free when people want to sign up. Um, and you can sign up for that through the website. I'm also quite active on social media. I have a LinkedIn profile. I'm on both Twitter as well as Instagram, and yeah, that's probably the best way
I
to.
love it. I love it. That's where I found you was on LinkedIn. So very, very, very good. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Have a good day, dear.
Thank you.